Hi, this is Bighara with another installment of my video blog. Today I'm going to talk about something that I call licensed RPGs or derivative. And by that I mean role-playing games where they're based upon some other piece of work. It can be a book or books, it can be a television show, movies, comic books, what have you. Some examples include things like Middle-earth role-playing or the Lord of the Rings RPG, Stormbringer or Elric, the new Harry Dresden RPG based on the Jim Butcher novels, the Serenity role playing game based on the Serenity movie and Firefly, sort of. Um, these are all examples. Marvel superheroes. That was the other one I was going to say. So it's based on actually a whole publishing house of various comic books and comic book characters in a sense. Um, these are all examples of a licensed role playing game that's based upon something that someone else has done before. I guess Call of Cthulhu would even fall into that category because it's actually based upon a lot of it's based upon the writings of H.P. Lovecraft. So you can see it spans different genres. It's not limited to just fantasy or just science fiction or horror or modern era or what have you. It can crop up in all sorts of places. And of course, the reason it happens is someone reads or sees a movie, reads a book or sees a movie or what have you, and says, wow, that was a neat story, or wow, I really thought that was cool. That would be a fun game because we're gamers and that's what we do. And then eventually, if one thing happens to another, someone says, yeah, enough people want to play a Middle Earth game, or they want to play a Firefly verse game or something like that, and they go around, they do what they have to do to get the rights, and next thing you know, there's an RPG for it. I'm kind of two minds about licensed RPGs. On the one hand, there are enough of these examples of things that I really enjoyed, either seeing in the movie theater or on TV or reading or what have you, that it to me it's kind of cool to be able to see that stuff and to see the way it's done, and wondering how would you translate that into a game, because when you game, or especially if you GM a lot, these are the kinds of things that just run through your head. It's sort of an occupational hazard. That's if I actually got paid to do it. But the other thing is, on the other hand, it can be a little limiting. Good example would be the Middle Earth games, and I'm thinking primarily of the Decipher Lord of the Rings game, which was out a few years ago when the movies were coming out. It's currently out of print. I believe there's a new version being worked up by another company, a new Middle Earth role playing game. I never really read the Iron Crown Middle Earth role playing. I was never really that into Rollmaster and the Iron Crown products at the time, so my experience with is with having bought a copy of the Lord of the Rings role playing game from Decipher when it came out and reading through that. And I'm not worried so much about the mechanics, like, oh, they did spells all wrong, or they did combat great, or whatever. That's not my point. Um, but when I talk about limiting, when you look at Middle Earth, it's an incredibly fleshed out setting, and somewhere in all the discussions and the histories of Middle Earth stuff that Christopher Tolkien published after his father's death, and on the appendices and the Silmarillion and all those books, there's a ton of detail, and you can keep digging and digging and digging and digging and know so much about Middle Earth. It's crazy. So the question then becomes, well, at what point do I get to be creative as a GM or even as a player and say, let's say you go off to these mountains over here and you encounter this sort of thing and you do this sort of thing and blah blah blah, and someone's gonna say, but that can't be right because there's this castle, or that whole area was fleshed out in this story, or whatever it is, and you're kind of hamstrung, or can feel that way. Now, to be fair, a GM can simply say, look, this is Middle Earth. Frodo's already destroyed the ring, or Frodo's going to destroy the ring. You're never going to find the ring. You're never going to find Gollum hiding under the mountains. You're never going to find any of that. You're never going to hang out with Aragorn. Just forget about all that. You know, you don't know any of that. Here you are in Middle Earth. You're hobbits. You're Dunedain. You're whatever you are. Let's just play. And we'll enjoy the setting and say, yes, the Shire's that way, and yes, Gondor's that way, or what have you. But we're not worried about any of the rest of it. And loosen it up and not stick to the official version. So you can do that. But the temptation is always to take advantage of the source material, whether it's Middle Earth or whether it's... Wasn't there something in that episode of Firefly? You know, didn't they say something about the name of this planet? You know, and then you're worrying, it's the same thing. On the flip side, it's a plus if you have players who maybe just watched a movie or read a book or were reading a series of books or into a particular thing, like they love comic books and or whatever, and it can be this great immersion thing, which I talk about sometimes. The idea that they already know all about Firefly. They already know all about Elric. They already know all about Tolkien. So if you say, hey, we're going to play Stormbringer, Michael Moorcock, you know, and they'd be like, oh, I want to be from the Island of the Purple Towns, you know, or whatever it is. They're into it. They're already there. They already have a familiarity with the setting. They already have a sense of the tone of the game. And you get that immersion. You get that buy-in. And that's great. But I do think it's a fine line to walk. I do think it's something we have to say, look, don't worry about the stuff that happens in the books. Don't worry about, again, you know, meeting the crew of Serenity or meeting Elric and Moonglum or any of that. Don't worry about what's supposed to happen by the, you know, third book of Harry Dresden or whatever it is. It's not relevant to our campaign without deviating so far from that setting and from that genre of and the feel of those books that you lose that immersion, that you don't want to create a discordance. I picked a little bit on Tolkien before because it's of just the sheer enormity of the material that's available. It can become incredibly daunting. I love Tolkien. I've read a bunch of it, and a couple of guys that I play with sometimes are also into Tolkien. And my brother, who, you know, he liked the movies, he read the books, fine, has said he'll never play a Middle-earth game. Not with us, because we know too much about the setting compared to him, and we would just never stop arguing about what's, you know, canon. And we don't even really consider ourselves like real Tolkien fanatics. There's tons of the histories and stuff I've never read. But just even that level of knowledge, that's another point. It can put players who are not up to speed on a given book or movie or show or whatever it is at a disadvantage, because the idea is, if you're familiar enough with Firefly or Marvel Comics or Middle Earth or whatever it is, because you're a big fan and you've been reading it or watching it for a long time, or in the case of Firefly, rewatching it because there's only so much to watch, you have, in a sense, an edge because you know all this stuff. You know where the Boiling Sea is, where Melniboné is, where, you know, or you know what happened to Gondor in the middle of the Second Age, you know, etc. And somebody else who's coming in a little more casually, and, you know, yeah, they saw the Lord of the Rings movies, and they aren't big Tolkien fans or something like that. They're at a loss a little bit because they don't know all this stuff, and they can feel a little left out, and that can be a drawback too. So I guess it's another example of kind of knowing your group, knowing what they want to do, but also my advice would be to people who want to play those kinds of games because they really enjoy the original works that they're based upon. Don't go overboard with slavishly following every little nuance of the source material, because you're going to end up painting yourself into a corner as often as not. In some cases, more so than others. In the case of Firefly, which is a good example, there's, like I say, there's a movie and there are 13 episodes, and that's all there was, beyond the couple of these graphic novels and stuff that have come out after the fact. But it's space. I mean, you can always make up a new planet or a new moon to go to. It's not a big deal. And a lot of stuff was never really defined completely. And you can always make some new stuff up. And that kind of creativity is where a lot of the fun comes from. So you don't want to get stuck in a situation where people are going to be arguing about, what year Elrond visited the Shire, or I don't know, whatever. But you don't want to get into that because it's not going to be fun for anybody. It's just going to degenerate into flipping through pages or looking up online, and that's not where you want to go. You want to play the game. You want to have fun with it. Anyway, that's what I got for now. Talk to y'all later.